Okay, I don't know if this is gonna work. Oh, it's much darker when I'm actually recording. This is the audio. It's got to be part two of the story Fair Science. And I'm just gonna pick up a little bit before where I had to leave off reading because outside the guy was cutting grass. Dr. Rusha was the most well-known scientist in the history of the world. It's a fictional story. He was also known as the strangest scientist in world history. He was completely bonkers. Sure, he was brilliant, originally innovative, and genius, but he was totally off his rocker. Unpredictable and even unbearably manic at times, to say the least. His business of the day involved reviewing the three files set before him. The first file he opened and jumped back repulsively. Ugh, he expressed, as he looked at the photo of a little girl, pigtails, braces, and dressed in a typical school uniform. He closed his eyes, reached for his coffee, and took another sip. This time, he tasted the bitterness, a little more than at first. He rubbed his eyes again before returning to the file. He read the description she and her parents submitted, describing their charming little child, their little girl. It read, Susan Climate is a young lady who knows what she wants and how to get it. She has excelled in everything she has put her mind to, and is exceptionally intelligent beyond her years. She has won first place 13 times at the state fair and achieved 32 trophies for her excellence in inventing. She is very active in recreational and constructive extracurricular after-school activities. Bah, spouted Dr. Rusha, followed by, yeah, yippee-yay for her. She's the jolly good fellow. Everyone give 3 cheers for Susie, eh? Then he quickly flipped to the next page. There he read what his hired staff wrote about the young girl when they met her in person. It read, This is a weird one. Before reading any further, Dr. Rusha took another sip of coffee, turned to his left, and spoke as if there was someone there. Mr. Miff, the head butler, was used to this by now. The first time Mr. Miff experienced it, he actually started to respond, but then quickly realized the good doctor was just thinking out loud. Dr. Rusha said, Exceptional. 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 He took another slightly larger sip of his inspiration juice, then continued, I'm not sure what that means, Mr. Miff. Mr. Miff? His head butler had snapped out of the normal meditation he did while his master carried on with his morning ritual. Yes, sire, he answered, not really sure of the question asked of him. Do you know what that means, Mr. Miff? Mr. Miff cleared his throat and stammered. No, sire, I can't say that I do, sire. Dr. Rusha inhaled deeply, then pushed the air out through his puffed cheeks. Well, he continued, I guess we'll find out. Exceptionally intelligent beyond her years. Humph. The guy's cutting the grass outside, and I'm inside now, but it's seeping through the window. So I hope that doesn't ruin this bedtime story for you. Hope you can hear me okay. I don't know if I can hold this closer and it'll be better or not, but I'll give it a try. I'm reading from a transcript where I have notes, scribbled in there and stuff like that, so I hope that it's okay. Enough apologies. Let me just, where was I? Puffed his cheeks out. Well, he continued, I guess we'll find out. Exceptionally intelligent beyond her years. He stood to his feet and approached the windows. The windows were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains and valleys surrounding his home. He pressed his nose and forehead against the glass, and his words fogged up the window pane as he went on to say, "State fairs, recreational, constructive, extracurricular, after-school activities." A bit over the edge, Mum and Dad. He then completed the thought with a sigh of discouragement. "Oh well, Mr. Miff, we'll see. We will see. We will see, huh?" Mr. Miff just nodded and said, "Just as you say, sire." The doctor sat back down and pulled his chair up closer to the little TV tray. "Would you like more coffee, sire?" asked his servant, trying to bring some comfort both to himself and his employer. "Nah, I must press on, Miff." What his staff wrote about Susan Climate was a whole lot more accurate and realistic than anything already scripted by Susie's mom and dad. Since I have not had the pleasure of meeting Susie, I don't know what she is really like now, do I? Mr. Miff was not sure if he should answer or not. Mr. Miff didn't fear his employer. He just highly respected him and didn't want to get in the way. He was there to help, not to hinder. Just then, Dr. Rusha clarified things by point blank saying, "Don't worry, Mr. Miff. I'm just thinking out loud." He shouted the last word of his sentence, but the whole house knew that it was all part of their boss's verbally animated character. There were times when they swore there were other people visiting in the house, but they just came to realize it was just the doctor doing his various impersonations or talking to himself. Reading further what his staff wrote, "A doozy." He sprung to his feet and said, "Doozy Susie, we got a live one here, folks." As he sat down in a jerk and read more, "This little girl thinks she is the smartest person on the planet and has the attitude to prove it. She's more of a smarty pants than intellectually sound. Just a little snot-nosed child," they had scribbled down in their notes. "Maybe not a true scientist." Dr. Rusha inhaled deeply again. "Now that is what I want to hear." A smile slowly appeared across his long face. "Now I can have more coffee, please, Mr. Miff." Mr. Miff didn't need to summon anyone. The kitchen personnel were waiting by the door, just waiting for the request. They knew the routine, although sometimes unpredictable. A friendly, well-groomed young lady came out with a scalding hot pot of coffee. She smiled as she poured a little more coffee to what was already in the cup. The doctor looked up with sincere gratitude and said, "Thank you, Jill. I truly don't know. I can't fathom what I would do without you." Then he raised his voice, almost scaring the girl. "Any of you and all of you. I appreciate all of you." She just gave a little curtsy bow and backed out of the room and into the kitchen, where she knew she would feel more sane and a little more safe. "Shh, enough," whispered Dr. Rusha. He rubbed his eyes again, and he stood to his feet, stretching his arms out into the air and around his body while his butt rose up into the air, and he burst out in moans of pleasure. "Oh, yeah! Okay, ready for some more," he said, and he sat right back down. The kitchen staff almost entered to bring him more coffee, but realized once again he was speaking to himself about what he was going to do next. Although Dr. Rusha was was so eccentric, he was still loved by his staff. Not to mention, he paid them much more than what they would make elsewhere. The doctor took another sip of the new coffee. "Now," Dr. Rusha said, as he closed Susan's file and slid it to the side, almost pushing it off the table completely. Then, in one fast flinch, he shoved the file he had finished off the TV tray and into the air. He turned and watched with delight the way the pages glided through the air and settled to the ground. I wonder if Susie can fly like that." His focus went back to the next file. "Next!" he shouted. The very next file folder he slid in front of him. He lifted up and smelled. "Smells like burnt match." He raised it slowly to his nose again and took a whiff and said, "Electrical." Then he placed it back down and opened it. He was stunned by the photograph he saw before him. I thought I woke up my wife because I was being too loud. She works night shift. She's sleeping. Okay, back to the story. Then he placed it back down and opened it. He was stunned by the photograph he saw before him. He thought how familiar this kid looked. "Miff, I can't put my finger on it, but I think I've seen this kid somewhere else before." "Miff?" the butler assured him. "Yes, I'm here, sire." Okay. I'm just checking. You know how I hate to be left alone, Miff." Mr. Miff smiled, and once again said, "Yes, sire," and gave a little smirk. Dr. Rusha looked over his shoulder at Mr. Miff and smirked back, then went on to read, "This is Philip Ross. He is better known as Phil Filament, for having invented a new type of light bulb filament. Phil likes to ride horses, play polo, and take long walks in the woods." Dr. Rusha couldn't contain himself and burst out laughing. "Wow, this kid is known for horseplay." He looked over his shoulder at Mr. Miff, still standing there, almost at attention, and he said, "Come on now, Miff. Get your composure back. This is serious stuff. Really, it's beyond a shadow of a doubt the most serious stuff you'll ever do. Okay, maybe not that serious. I think I need more coffee, please." As the nice lady entered again, he sang, "Pretty, pretty, pretty, please, with sugar on top, top, top." Steam rose from the coffee that was being poured into his barely empty cup. After thanking his staff member again, he went back to the business at hand. He said, "This is more like something you'd print in the paper looking for a date." As he turned to read the next page, he noticed it was not his staff's comments. Rather, it was the last part of what this little Mr. Philip had to say about himself. It read in bold, large print, as if one could not see it well enough in small print. "My name and actions speak for themselves." Dr. Rusha turned the page over, looking for something more, then said with a chuckle, "Well, there's nothing like a little confidence." He then found this page written by his staff, who had the elite privilege of meeting Mr. Phil Filament Ross. He read it out loud. This boy looks above your head when speaking to you. When asked about his scientific abilities, he just kept referring to his sole invention, as he said, creation. The new filament that allows light bulbs to last forever. Other than that, he just wanted to show us photos he brought with him and his horses. Dr. Rusha stood up for another stretch, not expressing himself out loud this time. He thought, "I wonder if this filament will arrive on one of his horses. That'd be cool. Maybe a Mustang? Dr. Rusha walked around his 20-foot oval dining room table a few times one way and then a few times backwards, as if he was retracing his steps in the snow. Then he sat back down, tried to make himself more comfortable in his small wooden chair, and closed Philip's file. There was one more file left, and Dr. Rusha was hoping this was the one he had been waiting for. The staff was hired to find these clever young people. Oh, I got it. The staff that was hired to find these clever young people were instructed to find two kids who thought they had some scientific talent and success, and one who seemed to have none but possessed a rich desire to learn everything Dr. Rusha had to offer. Dr. Rusha put his index finger on the next file and slowly moved it over, shoving the previous one off the edge and onto the floor. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and opened the file. When he looked down, he saw what appeared to be the most innocent, meek, and timid boy he had ever seen. "Looks can be deceiving," he said, not sure if there was a child alive today who had what all good scientists must embody. "Okay, let's see what you got," he continued to survey the file. He read silently, then stood up, walked toward the window, and began to read as he walked the last few sentences out loud. "And Benny's dream is to discover now how to invent something new and creative. And Benny's dream is to discover not how to invent something new or creative, something from an original idea, but to take what heroes of our past have started, as well as what nature itself tells us, and continue with those efforts. We should use that knowledge until all resources have been explored, leaving behind challenges and opportunities of success. This will increase growth for generations to come." Dr. Rusha stopped just before walking face first into the glass window, and he peered over the top of the folder. He raised his voice just above a whisper and said, "We evolve, we progress, we succeed, we build, we extend, we embellish, we embrace a belief that there's such a thing as too fast, too much, too many." Then he slid open the large glass door. He felt the freezing cold wind cut through his thin pajamas and touch his skin, and he yelled outside, "Why? Why do we keep coming up with more and more and more stuff we don't need? It's time to let science step up and be allowed to work while the scientist steps back." He repeated himself, yelling into the brisk air and hearing his voice echo off the mountains. "Time to let science work while scientists stop working. Science, stand up. Scientists, sit down. You hear me, world? People of the world, you hear me?" His last words echoed back, "Me, me, me, me." Dr. Rusha came back in and had a little trouble closing the heavy door. The wind force made things even more difficult. Mr. Miffs never saw the doctor so direct and upset about anything. Mr. Miff was not sure if he understood what was said. His boss went straight upstairs. He asked Mr. Miff to please pick up the files off the floor, tidy up a bit, and let him know when the children arrived. A few hours went by. Dr. Rusha had covered every square inch of his mansion, making sure everything was in place for the new young scientist to explore. The doorbell rang, and bounced off the marble floors and smooth stone walls. Mr. Miff moved toward the door. Unexpectedly, Dr. Rusha slid down the banister, ran up, and slid in front of his butler before the door was open. "Please, allow me this time, Mr. Miff." Mr. Miff stepped back and nodded. Dr. Rusha took a deep breath and let it out slow. He then turned the cold silver knob and opened the oversized door. The three young people he read about were now standing in front of him. Behind them, you could hear the snapshots of cameras and calls and shouts from the press. He looked down at the three standing there and said, "Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you came. Will you please excuse me just one moment, please? There is one matter I must take care of before you come in." He stepped around the children and spoke loud enough for the press to hear him. People, thank you for staying on the outside of the gates. I know it's hard to be held at bay, but I can assure you that at the end of the day, when we conclude our time together, I will come out there. We all will. And I'll fill you in on this wonderful experience. Thank you. Thank you all again. The world had its attention on what was taking place, not just because Dr. Rusha was always a character of interest, intrigue, and intelligence, but he had opened up his mansion and his mind to these three students. They were hand-selected. They were becoming known worldwide for their breakthroughs in science. Some newspapers labeled them as the next Dr. Rusha. Millions of people followed their progression on various social media sites, as well as on TV, news, and talk shows. Having addressed the public, the doctor turned around and ushered the guests from behind, almost like a sheepdog herds his flock. Once inside, he closed the door behind him and moved around in front of them. He saw their attention was fixated on the appearance of the mansion. Mouths open and eyes about to pop, they kept looking up and all around, trying to take in the size, majesty, and pure beauty. "It is nice, isn't it?" Dr. Rusha asked. The kids were speechless. Susan Climate was the first to look closely at Dr. Rusha. She was taken back and realized he was in his PJs still. And to top it off, they were the kind with feet built into them. She blurted out, "Why are you in your pajamas?" He simply answered, "So if I fall asleep while working on something, I'm dressed to rest." When the doctor turned to lead them into the house, they all chuckled a little and exchanged looks, noticing that there was a flap in the back that was held shut with buttons. This was just like the old long john underwear that could be opened in the rear so you could use the toilet without having to take off your clothes completely. He expected that reaction and kindly said, "When you're done chuckling about what I'm wearing on the outside of my body, I will escort you on a tour and share with you things inside my brain. I have invited you here because I have read and heard that each of you have captured the attention of the world with your scientific abilities. When I was young, I had no one mentoring me. My purpose and goal in meeting with you today is to get to know you, for you to get to know me, and for us to come together and consider our role in science." He then said in a sing-song manner, "First things first, pop goes the weasel, 'cause the weasel goes pop quiz, poppity pop, 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 pop quiz." He stopped and looked at the three young people and asked, "What do you like? Do you like my singing? I know you like my PJs." He received no response, just blank stares. So he just went on. I have a jar of water. Not acid, not urine, not even eyeball juice, but a jar of ordinary H2O water. Now, as I shake it, look, water's coming out, the floor's getting wet, someone may fall, somebody could get hurt, somebody could fall on purpose and try to sue me. Look at it as I'm shaking it. If I keep shaking it, there won't be anything left in the jar unless I refill it and do it all over again. He froze. He then spoke with his lips stuck together. His words came out funny, but they could understand what he was saying. They just couldn't figure out why he was saying it that way. Now, you 3 children, I'm not sure why I would refill it and do it again, but... Then he unfroze and snapped out of it. He then said clearly, okay, now here is the pop quiz. And I am going to assign you a grade level according to your answer. Question number 1. Benny, why did the water come out of the jar? Benny was nervous and didn't expect to be called on the spot, but he was able to say with some assurance and some logic, the lid was not on, right? With a question mark. The doctor said with great enthusiasm, yeah, no, that's not the answer I was looking for. 2nd grade. Sorry. Number 2. Philip. Same question. Philip was a little on edge too, but answered, 'Cause you shook it too hard, sir? The doctor smiled and started to nod his head yes, then shouted his own opinion, kindergarten. I still have not heard the bottom line. The exact and obvious reason. Now, you, young lady, nice to have you with us. And what is your answer to the same question? And please try not to answer with a question as the 2 young men did. Susan thought that she was the only one who had this right, and she puffed up and answered proudly, the jar is flawed. It could be, as my peer has recommended, that the cap is not correctly in place, or perhaps there is a crack. The presence of a small hole or any such particular imperfection in one area of displacement could very well be the specific and scientific rational reason the jar loses its capability and capacity to hold water, sir. Dr. Rouge stood there, not amazed at her knowledge, as she thought, but at her ignorance and her unnecessary use of words. He was pleased to inform her of the grade level he was assigning her to, and he snapped the words out quickly. Ain't been born yet. He took a deep breath in and said back to the head of the class, Benny, why did the water come out of the jar and onto the floor? Benny thought for a few minutes, and then he said, well, doctor, I was going to say this the first time you asked, but it seemed too simple and too obvious, I guess. But the reason the water came out of the jar is because the water is in the jar. The doctor leaped up toward the roof. Ho, whoa, 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 yes! Then he gave Benny the grade, master's degree, brilliant, good job. That is it. That is it, folks. Obvious, right there in front of our faces. What goes in must come out. And what has been put in, when shaken, pushed, or pressured enough, it will come out. If you have any piece of scientific material, especially chemicals, in a confined area, you have to know and never, never, never forget It can and probably will get out. Consider what harm it will cause for other scientific creatures. The doctor blinked his eyes rapidly. Then he raised his arms far above his head, took a really deep breath. "Come on now," he called. "We gotta shuffle through." The kids jumped to catch up to him, and when they were able to get close behind him, he turned around very rapidly. They literally bumped into him, unable to stop in time. "Oh, there you are," he said. "Now, please, come into my lounge, den-type relaxation room, and let's talk first and listen later, and then look before we leap." Not one of the nervous preteens had any idea what Dr. Rusha had just said or meant, but they did know without a doubt that this was going to be one weird day. I'm going to stop there for now. Thank you. Hope you can hear me.